Medications for opioid use disorders in correctional settings. Shifting the paradigm, creating a balanced correctional and rehabilitative approach. The Opioid Response Network is funded by SAMHSA to provide resources and technical assistance needed locally to address the opioid crisis. This video is part of a series to provide guidance on the implementation of medications for opioid use disorder in correctional facilities. Leading corrections and behavioral health experts present information on topics such as the use of medication, models of delivery, diversion, and linkages to care and community support. An interview with Brandon George, Indiana Addictions Issues Coalition.
My name is Brandon George. I am the director of Indiana Addictions Issues Coalition. We're a statewide nonprofit in Indiana. We focus on helping those with substance use disorder that are fighting addiction and getting into recovery.
How has Indiana been impacted by the opioid crisis?
Indiana has definitely been impacted by the opioid epidemic, or the overdose crisis, as I like to call it. And it's starting to put a lot of different strategies in place to help combat it, from implementing peers in the emergency departments to getting treatment inside of correctional facilities, broadening access to medication both in the community and in a correctional setting.
Why is it important to have treatment and peer support in correctional settings?
As somebody who is in recovery from severe substance use disorder and opioid use disorder, I've had firsthand experience of how the justice system treats individuals with substance use disorder. I've been in the system since I was a young teenager. I've been several run-ins, and despite the fact that I may have been given an assessment here or there, largely the response was minimal at best to what was going on in my life. By the time I was a young adult, I had several traumatic experiences, friends that were murdered as a result of drug deals, had been arrested multiple times. My relationships were broke down, and the response to that a lot of times was simply going to a couple educational groups. And we know that that's not the appropriate measure of treatment. I can think about specifically actually my last arrest. I was driving down the interstate. I had a couple police cars get behind me, and I knew immediately I was going to jail. I'd been participating in some not great behavior. And the literal thought that ran through my head, these cops got in behind me, and I didn't pull over. And the reason for that is, in my head, I knew what was coming. I knew I was going to jail. And I knew I was also going to experience the withdrawal that's associated with having opioid use disorder and when you're dependent on opiates. And so certainly that's not an excuse to lead the police on a chase, and that's not the cause, but that's what was going through my head at that time. I was thinking, I'm going to end up in jail with no access to anything, and it's going to be excruciating.
How common do you think that concern is echoed by individuals in similar situations?
Despite the fact that we're making some strides, and by strides I mean we're having conversations about treatment in facilities, still only a handful are really providing comprehensive care. My experience in the justice system is still the experience that's happening on a daily basis. And so, for instance, I got put into what they call their protocol for somebody with an addiction or opioid use disorder. It took me 6 days to get aspirin. 6 days of withdrawal, 6 days of sitting in a cell, 6 days of dehydration, 6 days of excruciating pain to get 2 aspirins. And so, unfortunately, we have to make do with what we have in there. And so you have people that will help out and provide soup and make sure that, you're not, vomiting on yourself, and help clean up. But that's really left up to individual people and other people that are actually in the facility as inmates. And that's what's happening on a daily basis across the country.
What was the turning point that helped you reach and sustain long-term recovery?
I get the question a lot of what was different the 10th time in treatment, or what what worked this time versus all the other previous times. And to think about it, I've been incarcerated several times in several counties. I've been in treatment probably 8 or 9 times at 6 different places. And what was different this time? And I don't think so much that it was the individual treatment I was receiving at the time as much as it was a culmination or an accumulation of all the treatment I had received. But some specific things did happen. I had access to medication for my opiate use disorder. I had access to individual counseling to help address some of the trauma and some of the adverse experiences that I had experienced. I had access to peer supports, other social supports, group therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, all these evidence-based practices that we know are helpful, but unfortunately aren't offered everywhere we go. So I would say a combination is what got me there.
How do you assist correctional facilities in implementing a MOUD program?
This is difficult, and there's no two ways around it. The intersection in between public safety and public health is not an easy one to navigate. And I'm not envious of our law enforcement friends that are stuck in these positions of being healthcare providers all of a sudden. Their job is to keep the community safe and to keep people safe that are in their facilities, and now they're being tasked with this enormous responsibility of helping our country get out of this crisis. And so one thing that I always encourage people to do is let people be experts in their area. And so, yes, we're going to do treatment inside a correctional facility, but that doesn't mean that the jail needs to become a treatment provider. Let's bring medical professionals in and let them be experts on medical care, and let the law enforcement be experts on keeping people safe. And so this takes a lot of open-mindedness on both ends of this. I think the medical professionals and treatment professionals really have to respect the seriousness and with what law enforcement has to do in keeping us safe. But law enforcement also has to respect the expertise of the medical community, knowing that this is their area of expertise. And as much as we want everything to be uniformed and one size fits all inside of a correctional setting, it's not that way with healthcare. And we need to give space for that to occur.
What is your focus and role as the director of the Indian Addictions Issues Coalition?
My job as the director of Indiana Addictions Issues Coalition is pretty vast. As an advocacy group, it's a really broad umbrella. So we fight for access to care, whether that's in community or in a correctional setting. We also participate in policy and legislation that's going to help people with substance use disorder, making sure that people who are offering services offer a full continuum. But your services shouldn't be based on your geographic location or what one individual provider believes in. You should be able to go to one provider and access all the best evidence-based practices, not what somebody chooses ideologically to believe in or they don't support. So making sure that providers are giving people the evidence-based practices they need, making sure people in the recovery community have a voice, making sure that people who are peer supports or people with lived experience are at the table when planning is taking place for projects and for project implementation. I'm really grateful in Indiana, our governor's office and our Division of Mental Health and Addictions is really supportive of the recovery community, and they invite us into all the conversations. And unfortunately, that's not the case everywhere. So a lot of this is based on relationships, and whether that's with governmental agencies or whether it's with correctional world, it all starts with a relationship and knowing who we're working with and letting people be experts in their area.
Has the treatment of opioid use disorders improved since you were incarcerated?
The world has changed drastically from when I was a teenager and I was starting to use substances and would probably qualify as somebody with substance use disorder, and I'm really grateful for that. We made enormous strides. I don't reflect on it too often because I'm always pressing forward to improve, but I was considered a bad person or a bad apple or a bad kid. I was kicked out of multiple high schools. I was the person that people didn't want their kids hanging around. Nobody asked me what was going on at home, or nobody asked me what was causing things. It was never, hey, this person needs treatment. It was always, this person has a behavioral issue. Let's get him out of our system. And so it was that way in school. It was that way in jobs. It was that way pretty much my big portion of my life. And so now we see that changing. People that are young adults or in school, as they have issues, they get caught drinking or using drugs, they are shifting to a focus of getting that person treatment. So it's not all punitive, but it's still there. And while we've made a lot of progress, we hear a lot about the fact we can't arrest our way out of this problem, but jails are still full of people who can't pass drug tests. And so we need more action behind those words. We need more off-ramps to the criminal justice system, and we're getting there. There's much more than there were when I was going through the system, but we've got a lot of work to do.
Why do you think that movement toward treatment versus punishment has been so slow?
Sometimes I take it for granted that everybody understands that substance use disorder and opioid use disorder really is a chronic condition. And I should still lead every talk I have by saying that it is a chronic condition and not a moral failing, because a lot of people really don't believe that. And I don't know if the correct word is stigma or discrimination, but it certainly still exists. And unfortunately, people have experience. They've got loved ones that used to drink really heavily, and they say, well, my uncle used to drink like that and he stopped. Well, that person probably didn't have severe alcohol use disorder the same way that I did. And that's the big difference in between somebody with a use disorder or not having one, is that person isn't able to stop despite these negative consequences. And that's really what separates the class. And so we compare apples to oranges. We compare somebody that doesn't have a severe use disorder with somebody that does and want them to act like they don't have it. So it's better, but we really need some effort still in that area.
If someone in Indiana is arrested and diagnosed with an opioid use disorder, what do they go through?
I'm grateful in Indiana we're making a lot of strides for what happens for people with opioid use disorder, substance use disorder who do get into the criminal justice system. Unfortunately, there's not many jails in the state who do provide medication for opiate use disorder, but it's a main initiative of the governor, and I think they hope to have 20 within a calendar year going. The National Judicial Opioid Task Force and Chief Justice Rush, who is from Indiana, has made combating this crisis one of her number one priorities. And so as that national task force made recommendation, Chief Justice Rush was able to roll that out in real time in Indiana, making sure that the courts know that people who are on medication need to stay on medication. Unfortunately, for a long time, probation officers, community corrections officers would tell people that they can't take a certain type of medication. And just reflecting on that, having an untrained person trump a doctor's orders is there's literally a lack of words in that scenario. And so providing the proper education to the justice system, which is not just the jails, but it is the courts, it is probation, community corrections, about the science around addiction, about use of medication is the best practice, and that people in that field shouldn't make decisions that doctors should be making, and we need to leave those up to the doctors.
What role does peer support play in treatment in correctional facilities?
It's vital to have peer supports within the correctional setting. There's nobody that can gain the trust and build the rapport with an individual as much as someone who's actually been there. And while I think correctional officers, I think jail staff can be great mentors, having somebody that's navigated a very broken system in there is really invaluable. The continuity of care from somebody leaving the correctional settings into the community is a massive gap. It doesn't happen very often. Even jails that have really good programs inside the jail, most of them don't have a connection to the community. And so when the person gets out, they're all on their own. And so peers can help bridge that gap. If we're waiting to engage somebody a week before they're leaving jail, we've already missed our opportunity. We should be working with that person a month, 2 months, 6 months in advance, making sure that they've got a healthy environment to go to, make sure that the community health provider is expecting them upon release to come get an assessment or continue whatever treatment they're on. And peer supports, recovery coaches play a really big role in this. And I think they're integral into getting us to the next phase.
What would be your primary argument for implementation of medication treatment for opioid use disorders in correctional facilities?
There's a lot of skeptics when it comes to providing medication for opiate use disorder. And there are sheriffs and jailers across the country that spend a lot of time trying to keep buprenorphine out of their jail. So having a conversation about voluntarily bringing something in that they're desperately trying to keep out doesn't make sense to them. And so it's important to understand, we hear the argument a lot about trading a drug for a drug. Aren't we just trading one drug for another? And I really think my response to that is no, we're not. We're trading a drug for a medication. And we found out through studies now, just last year there was a study done that found out nearly 90% of people who are using diverted buprenorphine were doing so to avoid withdrawal. They were diverting it because they were using it for a medical reason. There's a big myth about people getting high off of it. It's not a preferred substance for people that get high. Is it possible for somebody in very individualized situations to do so? Absolutely. And that's why I think it's important to clear up information there. If somebody's taking a medication on a regular basis, is not going to get a euphoric feeling on it. Maybe the first day they may feel a little bit different, but that's the same of any medication. If I start a SSRI or any other mental health pharmacotherapy, I'm going to feel off for a couple days, and buprenorphine's the same way. But once a tolerance is built, you're not going to feel that euphoric feeling, and if people aren't, the black market for it essentially vanishes. People no longer have to buy it illegally when they can go to the doctor and get it themselves.
What is your takeaway from this conference?
I'm really grateful for the Opioid Response Network and the National Council bringing together law enforcement, behavioral health, legal professionals on a topic that it's maybe one of the biggest that we'll face. And my hope is that we have all the right people at the table. I think when we sit down with people that we respect and know, and that we value their point of view, that real progress can be made. We talk about having people with lived experience at the table. Every single person that's here sits on committees, advisory boards, coalitions in their county. And my challenge to them is there somebody in the recovery community on that panel? And if there's not, go find one. Find somebody from the local social supports or 12-step community or peer-based community and invite them to it. And that way you can get a perspective from somebody that's been through it, has experience in the system, and can help inform where we're going.
Technical assistance is available to support the evidence-based prevention, treatment, and recovery of opioid use disorder. To request technical assistance, visit opioidresponsenetwork.org.